I told my son I was leaving for 2 weeks. I watched him hug me at the front door, smile at my wife, and say, "Enjoy yourselves. You deserve the break." I smiled back. Then my wife and I drove 3 miles, parked at a hotel, and waited. We never left town. At 11:43 that night, the camera above my study door showed Daniel unlocking my front door. Celeste followed him. They weren't visiting. They walked straight toward my study. I watched as Celeste closed the curtains. Daniel opened drawers, searched cabinets, and emptied the small safe where I kept papers. My wife stared at the monitor. "Harold," she whispered, "what are they looking for?" "I don't know yet." Then Daniel found the envelope. My new will. Freshly signed. Deliberately placed where someone searching my study would find it. Celeste unfolded the pages. She read the first paragraph. Then she laughed. "That's it?" Daniel looked over her shoulder. She tapped my signature. Like a senile old man's signature matters. My stomach tightened. Daniel laughed with her. Then he tore the will straight down the middle. My wife reached for my hand. I didn't move. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Daniel began searching again. He opened the bottom drawer. Then the locked cabinet. Then my desk computer. Celeste pulled out a folder. Daniel shook his head. "No. Dad keeps it somewhere else." "Then find it." "What?" "The deed." My heart sank. They weren't just looking for a will. They were looking for proof that they owned my house. And suddenly, the questions I'd ignored for months began fitting together. Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe and join our growing family for emotional stories of family, betrayal, justice, and unforgettable life lessons. And tell me in the comments what country you're watching from. I love knowing where everyone is listening from. I watched my son search through the home I'd built. I watched Celeste point toward another locked drawer. And I realized something that frightened me more than seeing Daniel destroy my will. He wasn't searching for an inheritance. He was searching for proof that he already owned one. Before that night, Daniel had been the person I trusted most in the world. I still remember him at 8 years old, following me around construction sites in an oversized yellow helmet, asking why one wall had to be stronger than another. I taught him about property, but more importantly, I taught him about promises. If you give someone your word, I used to tell him, you keep it even when keeping it costs you. His mother, Miriam, would laugh from the passenger seat whenever Daniel repeated my lessons back to me. She was the warmth in our family. When Daniel was 16, he helped me repair an old rental property. We worked until sunset, covered in dust, eating sandwiches on the hood of my truck. He looked at me and said, "Dad, someday I'll build something bigger than you ever did." I smiled. "I hope you do." Years passed. Daniel became successful in his own right. He bought a home, built a career, and eventually married Celeste. At first, I liked her. She was polished, intelligent, and affectionate toward Daniel. I had no reason to distrust her. And perhaps that's why I ignored the first changes. Daniel started asking about my property. At first, I thought he was thinking about the future. Then one evening, while Miriam was making coffee, he asked casually, "Dad, have you ever thought about what happens to the house if something happens to both of you?" I looked at him. "That's an odd question." He smiled. "I'm just trying to make sure everything's organized." I accepted the answer. After all, this was my son. The same boy who once held my hand crossing a busy street. The same boy who had looked me in the eyes at 18 and said, "Dad, I'll never let you down." I remembered that sentence whenever doubt entered my mind. That was my mistake. I was judging the man in front of me through the memories of the boy he'd been. I thought Daniel was finally becoming interested in taking care of us. I didn't realize he was beginning to calculate what we were worth. The questions became more frequent. Daniel asked about my investment accounts. Celeste asked whether Miriam had changed our will. Then came questions about the house. How much do you think it's worth now? Does your attorney handle everything? Are there any mortgages left? They never asked all of it in one conversation. That was what made it easy to dismiss. Each question arrived wrapped in concern. Celeste once touched Miriam's arm and said, "We just want to know you'll both be taken care of." Miriam smiled. I didn't. Something about the way Celeste looked around the room bothered me. not affection. Assessment. Then I discovered something I couldn't explain. Daniel mentioned a property valuation I'd never shown him. A few days later, he asked about a bank withdrawal I hadn't discussed with anyone. Then my attorney called. "Harold, did Daniel speak to you about the estate documents?" "No, why?" There was a pause. He asked me a few questions. I thanked him and hung up. That evening, I checked my own records. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing obvious had happened. But Daniel seemed to know things he shouldn't know. I asked Martin, my attorney, to quietly review what he could. 2 days later, he came to my house. He placed a folder on the table. "Your son has financial problems." I opened it. Credit cards. Personal loans. A failed investment. Several overdue obligations. Then came Celeste's information. Her debts were smaller, but they were growing too. I looked at Martin. How bad? Bad enough that someone expecting a large inheritance might start making plans around it. I closed the folder. That sentence stayed with me, because suddenly the questions made sense. The house. The accounts. The will. The attorney. Daniel wasn't simply curious anymore. He was looking towards something he believed would eventually belong to him. And once people begin spending tomorrow's money today, tomorrow can become dangerously important. They weren't waiting for me to die anymore. They were planning around the date they believed I would. Daniel sat in his car outside a collection agency's office, with both hands gripping the steering wheel. A final notice lay on the passenger seat. Celeste called him. "Did they give you more time?" "No." "What about the bank?" "They want security." There was silence. Then Celeste said, "Your father has enough to save us." Daniel looked through the windshield. "Don't talk about him like that." "Like what?" "Like he's an account." Celeste sighed. "Daniel, you're his only son. The house will be yours eventually." Eventually. That word changed the conversation. Daniel didn't answer. He knew what his father had taught him about taking what wasn't his. But another creditor had already warned him that another missed payment could trigger legal action. His investment had failed. His business partners wanted their money back. Celeste had obligations of her own. They weren't facing one enormous disaster. They were facing several smaller ones arriving at the same time. And every one of them pointed toward the same solution. Harold's property. That evening, Celeste spread papers across their kitchen table. "We need the deed." Daniel frowned. "And the will. Your father's financial information too." He stared at her. "What if Dad finds out?" Celeste leaned closer. "He won't. You don't know that. He's 78, Daniel. He trusts you." Daniel looked away. That was the part that made him uncomfortable. His father trusted him. But Celeste kept talking. "Once you have the property documents, the bank will have something to work with." Daniel finally nodded. They began making a list. Deed. Will. Account information. Attorney's contact details. Anything that could prove what Harold owned and what Daniel would eventually inherit. Neither of them called it theft. They called it preparation. That was how they made themselves comfortable. By then, my son wasn't asking whether he should take my property. He was asking himself how quickly he could get his hands on it. Miriam and I met Martin at his office 3 days later. He closed the blinds before placing a folder on the desk. "Daniel has been asking questions," he said. "Not illegal questions, but enough to concern me." Miriam looked at me. "Then we protect everything." Martin nodded. The original deed was moved into secured custody. Our genuine estate documents were replaced in the home files with copies. The accounts requiring protection were locked behind additional authorization. Even the access codes were changed. I asked Martin one final question. "If Daniel asks whether we've changed anything?" "Tell him the truth," he said. "Tell him you're reviewing the estate." That evening, I placed a thick envelope inside my study drawer. Inside was a document designed to look like the newest version of our will. It carried convincing details. Names. Property descriptions. Inheritance language. Even an old copy of my signature. But it was not the document that governed our estate. The real plan was somewhere Daniel couldn't reach. Miriam stood behind me. "You're leaving that where he can find it?" "Yes." "What if he takes the bait?" I closed the drawer. Then, we'll finally know what he's capable of when he thinks nobody is watching. She looked at me for a long moment. You're hoping he'll prove you wrong. I didn't answer. I wanted my son to ignore that drawer. I wanted him to call me. I wanted him to ask what would happen to the house someday. I wanted one ordinary conversation to make all of this unnecessary. So I installed one more camera. If he crossed the line, I would never again have to wonder whether I'd imagined the warning signs. I wasn't setting a trap for my son. At least that's what I told myself. I was giving him one last chance to show me I was wrong about him. Before leaving, Miriam looked at the drawer one last time. If he finds it, she said, you'll finally know. I nodded. That is what frightens me. She squeezed my hand. Then hope he's your son. I wanted to believe that. At 11:43 that night, the front camera showed Daniel's car rolling into the driveway. Celeste got out first. Daniel looked toward the dark windows. Neither of them knocked. He unlocked the door. They really came, Miriam whispered. I nodded. Inside the house, Daniel switched on the hallway light. Celeste followed him toward my study. They knew exactly where to look. Daniel opened the desk. Celeste checked the drawers. Then, she found the envelope. She pulled out the will and scanned the first page. Her mouth curled into a smile. Look at this. Daniel stepped closer. She pointed at my signature. Like a senile old man's signature matters. Daniel laughed. Then, he tore the document in half. Miriam flinched beside me. I didn't. The camera showed Daniel drop the pieces into the wastebasket. Then, Celeste opened another drawer. Where's the deed? I don't know. You said your father kept everything here. He does. They searched harder. Cabinets. File boxes. The locked desk compartment. Daniel tried the small safe. He cursed. Celeste looked at him. We need it tonight. Why? Because Martin already told the lender we can provide proof. My eyes moved toward Miriam. Daniel had promised a creditor something he didn't possess. That explained the urgency. He wasn't breaking into our home because he suddenly wanted our inheritance. He was trying to save a financial disaster he had already created. Daniel opened my computer. The screen requested a security key. He tried several passwords. None worked. Celeste slammed her palm against the desk. Your father has to have something. Daniel looked toward the filing cabinet. Then, we'll find it. They pulled folders onto the floor. Tax records. Insurance papers. Old correspondence. Nothing. Then Daniel noticed a property appraisal. He unfolded it. His eyes widened. This land is worth more than they told us. Celeste leaned over his shoulder. Then we need the deed. I watched my son stare at the appraisal. For the first time, I understood how far desperation had changed him. They had destroyed the document they thought would save them. What they didn't know was that destroying it had told me exactly how far they were willing to go. Daniel stopped searching the drawers. He went back to the computer. Celeste stood beside him. If we can't find the deed, get the account information, she said. Daniel hesitated. That could be a crime. She stared at him. So is going back to the bank empty-handed tomorrow. He looked at the screen and continued. The system rejected his attempt. He tried another route. Then he opened a folder containing scanned financial documents. I watched the security alert appear on my phone. Miriam saw my expression. Harold? They're trying to access protected records. She understood immediately. Are you ready? I watched Daniel continue. No. How much longer? Until they do something they can't explain away. A minute later, Daniel opened a locked cabinet. He found the emergency property file. He pulled it toward himself. Celeste whispered, "Take it." Daniel reached inside. The alarm exploded through the house. Every light came on. Daniel froze. Celeste screamed. The front doors locked automatically. Then the security company called the police. Daniel dropped the file. Dad. He looked toward the camera. For the first time that night, he knew I had been watching. Police arrived minutes later. They entered, secured it, and separated Daniel and Celeste. The officer examined the damaged documents, the attempted computer access, and the property file Daniel had tried to remove. The destroyed will was evidence of what they intended. The unauthorized entry, attempted access, and removal of protected property documents were what put handcuffs around their wrists. As the officers led them outside, Daniel kept looking toward the camera. Miriam was silent beside me. I stared at the screen. The police car disappeared beyond the trees. I had imagined always protecting my son. That night, I had watched him become someone I needed protection from. And yet, as terrible as that moment was, Daniel still believed the worst thing he'd lost that night was his inheritance. He had no idea what was waiting for him in the plan he had never seen. The first call came the next morning. It was from Daniel's lender. They had expected him to provide proof that the property could eventually secure the refinancing. Instead, they received a very different answer. The property wasn't his to pledge. The loan officer wanted to know why Daniel had represented otherwise. By noon, another creditor had called. Then another. The promises Daniel had made were suddenly worthless. His planned refinancing collapsed before it could even begin. Celeste learned about it from one of their investors. "You told us the house was going to be yours." She looked at Daniel. He couldn't answer. For the first time, the truth became unavoidable. He had risked everything for something he had never controlled. His father's house wasn't an asset waiting for him. It was still his father's. And Daniel had destroyed the trust between them trying to reach it. That afternoon, Martin called me. "Harold, there's something you need to know." I sat down. "The document Daniel destroyed wasn't your actual will." I closed my eyes. "I know." Martin paused. "I thought you should hear it from me before Daniel does." My wife sat beside me. She had known from the beginning. The real estate plan had never been in that drawer. The document Daniel tore apart had served its purpose. It had shown us what he would do when he believed there would be no consequences. Before we continue, if this story has you thinking about what you would do in a parent's place, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. These stories are about the choices families make when money, trust, and love collide. I looked at Miriam. She asked quietly, "Are you ready to tell him?" I wasn't sure, because the arrest had been simple. The consequences were simple. But the decision waiting behind that locked estate plan was not. My son thought he had destroyed his inheritance that night. He hadn't. However, you, Pepe. He had destroyed something far more important. And I was about to decide whether he deserved to know what remained. Daniel came to my house 3 weeks later. He looked exhausted. He stood in the doorway without his usual confidence. "Dad, I need to know something." I let him inside. "Did I destroy everything?" "No." His eyes lifted. "The will you tore up wasn't the real one." He stared at me. "What?" I sat across from him. "The genuine estate plan was completed months before you entered my house." I explained the structure carefully. The property had been placed into a protected family trust. Daniel couldn't simply sell it. He couldn't pledge it as collateral. He couldn't demand control because he was my son. The trust existed for a reason. To protect the property from exactly the kind of pressure he'd created. Daniel lowered his head. "So you planned all of this?" "No." I shook my head. "I protected what your mother and I built. You decided what you were going to do." He looked at me. "Then why leave that will there?" I didn't answer immediately. Because I needed to know whether my suspicions were wrong. Daniel swallowed. "They weren't." "No." Silence filled the room. Then he asked the question I'd known was coming. "So I'm getting nothing?" I looked at him. "You're asking about money again." His face fell. "I just need to know what my future is." "Your future isn't something I can hand you in an envelope." He looked away. For years, I'd imagined my son receiving everything I'd built. I had pictured pride, gratitude, family. I had never pictured him standing in front of me asking whether there was anything left to inherit after trying to take it, but I still hadn't told him the most important part. The real estate plan didn't say he was getting nothing. It said something much harder. He would have to become the kind of man who could be trusted with it. That was the question my son asked. But it wasn't the question I had spent months trying to answer. I opened the final estate file. Daniel watched my hands. "The real plan doesn't disinherit you." He looked up. You're still leaving me something? Yes. His relief appeared for only a moment. Then I continued. You'll receive a substantial inheritance, but you won't receive control of the property immediately. He listened. The house remains protected for future generations. You cannot sell it simply because you inherit an interest in it. Daniel nodded slowly. And your debts? He looked down. Those are yours to resolve. A portion of the estate would also support a cause Miriam and I had cared about for years. The rest would remain protected until Daniel demonstrated that he could manage what he received responsibly. Celeste was not included. She had never been part of the estate plan. Daniel sat silently. Then he asked, Why would you do this to me? I looked at my son. Because I was afraid that if I died without knowing the truth, I'd leave my life's work to a son who only loved me for what he thought I'd leave behind. His eyes filled immediately. Dad, I continued before he could speak. I wasn't testing whether you deserved my money. I took a breath. I was trying to find out whether I could still trust my son. Daniel covered his face. For the first time since he entered my house that night, I didn't see the man who had searched my study. I saw the little boy in the yellow helmet. The boy who once followed me around asking how houses were built. The boy who once promised he would never let me down. And I understood something painful. I couldn't change what he'd done. I couldn't erase the fear and betrayal we'd both caused each other. But I could decide what came next. Daniel lowered his hands. I don't know how to fix this. You don't fix it in one day. How long? As long as it takes. He nodded through his tears. The arrest had been the consequence. The inheritance was the decision. But forgiveness was something money could never purchase. Daniel didn't rebuild his life overnight. He still had debts to face, creditors to answer, and consequences nobody could erase for him. Celeste eventually left when the inheritance she expected never came. I didn't pay Daniel's debts. I didn't hand him control of the property. But I didn't abandon him either. Every Sunday he came to my house. At first, we spoke for 10 minutes. Then 20. Eventually, we stopped talking about money altogether. One afternoon, Daniel brought me an old photograph of us at a construction site. He was 10 years old, wearing an oversized yellow helmet. I found this in Mom's things, he said. I smiled. You thought you were going to build the whole city. He laughed. Then he became quiet. I thought all you ever wanted was for me to be successful. I shook my head. Not successful. He looked at me. Trustworthy. His eyes filled. I know. That was enough for me. Because trust wasn't going to return because of a will or an inheritance. It would return through ordinary things, showing up, keeping promises, and telling the truth when lying would be easier. My son once promised he would never let me down. He broke that promise. But now he was learning how to become the man who could keep it. I didn't protect my estate because I hated my son. I protected it because I loved him enough to discover the truth before money made the decision for both of us. And perhaps that was the real inheritance, not the house, the accounts, or the property. It was the chance to become worthy of what you're given. Some people will tell me I should have given my son nothing after what he did. Others will say a father should always leave the door open. But if you had been standing where I stood, would you have forgiven him? And if he were your son, would you still leave something behind for him? If this story made you think about someone in your own family, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the hardest thing a parent can leave behind isn't money. It's one final chance to become the person they always hoped you would be.